ऑडियो आउटपुट देख लो, चेक, ठीक है। So good afternoon. Today we are going to start with the next part of disaster management. So we have till now understood what exactly is disaster management, what are the aspects which are related to it, and now we are going to go ahead with discussing what is the institutional mechanism for disaster management in the country. Okay, so that is what we are going to do today. So in this particular session, we are first of all going to discuss few basics: historical evolution of disaster management. That's the first thing that we are going to discuss. Then we are going to look into the institutional structure, and then we are going to look into the Disaster Management Act of 2005. We need to very clearly understand what exactly is the provisions which are related to the Disaster Management Act of 2005 for the purpose of understanding what exactly is the responsibility of each form of the government. Okay, so that is what we are going to do with respect to this particular session, and if time permits, we are going to go ahead with the disaster management of earthquake. Okay, so let us begin with the first part, that would be the historical evolution of disaster management in the country. So disasters, as we have discussed already, that disasters has not been one of those things which have been new to the humanity. Disaster has always struck humanity at various times, but the approach has definitely changed. Yesterday we were discussing about Yokohama, the Yokohama Declaration. So before that, the objective of disaster management only limited itself to the occurrence of a disaster and provision of relief. Okay, after 1994, the Yokohama Declaration, we see that we have transformed it into a proper structural management thing. So that being said, this is something which also was the case with respect to India. So during the British time, before that, there is no proper record of what exactly used to happen with respect to disaster, because no one actually had scientific understanding of things. So with the you can say advancement of technologies, with the development of various kinds of sensors and seismographs and things like those, we were able to study physically what is exactly the cause of disasters. So this access to knowledge was not there. Okay, further at the same time, even if the access of knowledge was there, we were not able to understand what would be the intensity or impact of a disaster. So vulnerability was very high. That is why whenever the disaster would strike, we would not have any type of you can say approach, rather than having just providing the relief after a disaster. So you would not act until a disaster strikes. So that is why this is something which is known as the relief oriented measures of disaster. So when we talk about the times of British India, so at that particular moment of time, the kind of you can say management of disaster that was there with respect to the country was just the establishment of relief departments, but that too only after a disaster strikes. So depending upon whatever is the disaster, there will be two things. One, you will be providing relief. Second, you will be focusing on food for work program. Okay, these were only the two things that you could be doing, because at that particular moment of time, the British were not very enthusiastic about managing the disasters, and plus Indians did not have the kind of income that we actually have today. So at that particular moment of time, it was a struggle for survival, and the worst hit people of India, which were always the common people, will have nothing left with them. None of their belongings, nothing is going to be there with them. So that is why what happened was that they would launch such temporary measures. Okay, apart from that, they will be giving some amount of free food. Okay, some amount of you can say clothing, some basic community shelter kind of thing, and that's it, nothing more than that. Now what happened was that after the independence, so after the independence, what we see is that there is a two-tier structure. So after the independence, we see that at the center, so this is post 1947. So we see that now we have a central relief commissioner. Okay, again you are seeing that what exactly is the objective? Providing relief. Okay, there would be a central relief commissioner. Now this particular individual is going to work at the level of government of India. Okay, and under this will be relief commissioners. Now these relief commissioners would be the individuals who are going to be at the level of states. Okay, and what is going to happen? They are only going to work on two things. What was their overall objective? This entire system had just one objective: allocation of funds for relief. That's the first thing. And the second thing that will be there apart from this would be allocation of relief material itself. Nothing more than that. This was the overall you can say setup that usually was there till safely you can say 1990. Okay, this was the overall setup that we had. Now what happens in 1990 is that United Nations General Assembly, it comes up with another declaration. Okay, so there is a United Nations General Assembly. I'm not sure you'll be knowing the full form, so I'll write it. UN you guys know, right? So UN General Assembly, it is abbreviated as UNGA. Okay, so this basically came up with the declaration of the decade of 1990. For disaster risk reduction. Okay, this was basically the declaration that was given, and technically 1990 to 2000, this particular decade was decade for, it was declared as the decade for disaster risk reduction. Okay, so that is something that you see with respect to the disaster risk reduction. This is what we see. Okay, so in this particular time frame, when you talk about 1990 to 2000, one thing that you have already seen yesterday was Yokohama Declaration. You remember? So Yokohama Declaration, that basically came up in 1994, that actually transformed our worldview about disasters. But more importantly than this, in this particular time 1990 to 2000, we are struck by very severe kind of natural disasters. We have Latur earthquake in 1993. This is something that happened in 1993. We had the Malpa landslide. This was in 1994. We had the Odisha super cyclone in 1999. And then just after 2000, we had Bhuj earthquake of 2001. Now these were some of the most devastating disasters India saw over a period of these 10 years. And that is why it was understood that there is a severity of cyclone, severity of these particular things that are increasing. And the second thing that was understood was that we now need to come up with a structural form of plan with respect to various disasters that are there. Okay, so what exactly have been the measures that were taken by the government of India? So if we talk about those measures, the first thing, we have a very limited understanding of disasters with respect to India for most of you can say post-independence history. So that is why the only disaster that was to be managed was something which was floods, because most of India being an agrarian economy, so that is why floods were something whose dedicated disaster management was given. Okay, floods were included for DM. I am writing DM for disaster management under every 5-year plan. Under the heading irrigation, command area development, and flood management. Under this particular heading, every single 5-year plan basically talked about having the management of flood. Okay, then we basically see in 1990s, post the declaration given by United Nations General Assembly, we see a disaster management cell is constituted under the Ministry of Agriculture. So still you see that the concept of disaster management still is seen to be dealt by the agriculture ministry of the country. It was not something which was a broader concept, it was a very limited kind of thing that happened. Okay. Now after the you can say the various kinds of earthquakes that basically happen, earthquakes and landslides, then we come up with the high powered committee headed by J.C. Mehta. Now this particular individual was the secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture. Okay. So after the Bhuj earthquake, this particular committee was established. Okay. Now the objective of this particular committee was to develop a comprehensive and holistic plan to deal with disasters in the country. Okay. So they basically recommended that there should be some amount of formalization of this concept of disaster management in the country. This is not something which is going to be a policy level measure. Okay. We need to be discussing it with the experts. We need to be discussing it with the relevant academia so that we can come up with a proper strategy. So that is why this particular recommendation led to the transfer of this particular disaster management cell to MHA. So in 2002, you see the formation of disaster management division under Ministry of Home Affairs. Okay, this is something which is known as MHA. And this particular Ministry of Home Affairs, this disaster management division, this was to be headed by a joint secretary. Okay. So joint secretary of the Ministry of Home Affairs is going to head this particular division known as the disaster management division. And since 2002, this particular division has been under MHA till date. Okay. So after this particular transfer of you can say powers and functions, what basically happened was that there was another multi-stakeholder interministerial high-powered committee that was formed. So this particular committee not only had the representatives of various ministries which are going to be handling the disaster management, but also the members of academia, okay, the researchers, the experts who were there from the civilian side, even NGOs who had experience in this, and based upon them there were recommendations. So they had various recommendations. Okay, the first one of this particular was institutionalization. So that was the first recommendation they gave, that we need a separate law for the purpose of disaster management. It cannot happen beyond that, and it will need a separate institution. So establishment of a specialist institution for disaster management and capacity building. And third, it talked about financial mechanism for disaster management. These were the three major recommendations that were given by this high powered committee that was there with respect to you can say the disaster management job that was given. Okay. Any doubts till here? Although it's just story, what doubts? Every single disaster that we are going to study, okay, that will basically have one or other case study. Not even just related to a state, it could also be an international case study. Like when we talk about earthquake, we usually talk about Fukushima, that is Japan. Okay, when we talk about tsunami, again we talk about Japan or New Zealand. Okay, so that ways you will be having case studies, but these are for example values. Okay, but yeah, what happens is that from the institutional mechanism, these things need to be clear because you are going to use this very frequently with respect to your answers. Okay, anything else? Writing something? Okay, shall we go ahead? Okay, so after this comes the Disaster Management Act. Okay, now this is something that we have done. This is also something that we have done. Yeah, let us talk about disaster management. So based upon the recommendation of this particular committee, we came up with the Disaster Management Act. That again came in a kind of too soon too late situation. Okay, because this particular act actually came up in 2005, Disaster Management Act, and by the time this particular act came into existence, we already had faced Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. Okay, so what exactly has been the situation with respect to disaster management? So first of all, any such law which is to be made for such a complicated process needs to identify certain aspects of responsibilities, and before identifying the aspects of responsibilities, you would always need certain clarity with respect to terms. Okay, so I am telling you in general how, have you ever seen any law that is actually made by the parliament for the purpose of implementation? Have you seen any law till date? Read any draft, any document related to any law? No? Yes or no? Just tell me that. So say no, no. I understand. That's okay. So see, tell me one thing, that let us say tomorrow I tell you that, Acha, tell me what exactly are you good at with respect to what, if I give you some work, what would you want to do? What do you want to do? I mean, if I give you a free hand, I'm not saying you have to be a bureaucrat. If I ask you, I need to give you some work and I have every kind of work available. So what exactly would you want to do? Coding, logistics, very nice. Writing, sports, no work. No, ma'am. See, everyone has been specific, no? So what exactly do you think you enjoy doing? That you would enjoy doing. I'm not saying that I'm going to give you something that I require. That you enjoy doing. Some NGO related to. See, don't give these answers in the interview. You'll need to be pretty specific. NGO is a very big sector, and it has plethora of institutions working on different, you can say, issues. There are NGOs which are related to orphans, to old age, to human trafficking, for that matter, leprosy, AIDS, sexually transmitted diseases, you can say, for that matter, protection and prevention of the harassment of sexual you can say, these sex workers and all. Many NGOs. Old age. Okay. So technically you would want to work with, you can say, old age related things. Okay. Now, tell me, if I don't define your work for you, if I don't tell you what exactly you're going to, you can say, take up in the logistics part, okay, I don't tell you what to write, I don't tell you which sport to play, and I don't give him a program on which I need something, and I don't, what exactly is old age, will you be able to do your work? Without me giving you an objective to write a program, or for that matter, an agenda for you or a theme for you to write something, or for that matter to make you understand what kind of logistical services I require, you might be thinking of aircraft services. I may not have even, you can say, a proper aerodrome here. So will you work? Will you be able to work? So what basically is required for any job is a job description, right? Before that, you will not be able to work. So similarly, when you talk about any law in the country, in order for that particular law to be utilized in the country, you will need to have a description for it. So that is why every single law in the country starts with section 2. Section 1 will always be the index page that you have as contents. Section 2 will always contain definitions. Okay. Now these definitions are legal. Why? Because based upon these definitions only the application of the law and the evaluation of the violation of the law is going to happen. Let us say, for that matter, that you talk about a disaster. Okay. I have not defined a disaster. So tomorrow you might feel that, okay, this particular, you can say, a water body which has been turned into a drain, and that is something which is giving off foul smell, is also a disaster. Will this be a right definition for a disaster? The answer would be no. That is something which is caused by pollution. Yes, if there is an epidemic which is starting from it, that will be a public health concern. But then again, the word is epidemic. If this epidemic spreads in the entire state, we can then call it a disaster if it is something which we are not able to cope up on our own. Okay. So there are various degrees at which you are going to call something as a disaster or something which is not a disaster. So that is why, unless I define what exactly is a disaster, you will not be able to identify, okay, this is what is a disaster. Okay. So temporary water shortage for, let us say, 1 or 2 days cannot be termed as drought, right? And similarly, if there is a very heavy rainfall for 1 day or maybe 2 days, you cannot term it as flood. because this water is not logging behind it, it is going to go away, right? So that is why the first thing that you will need to do is define disasters. So that is why any law that starts, any law that will be there will always give you certain definitions. Why are these definitions given? For two things: applying this law and also evaluating where this law was you can say violated. Let us say that a drought has been declared in a particular place, okay, but the district disaster management authority failed to acknowledge and release the relief material. So at that moment of time, the citizen can now go to the court and claim that the district disaster management authority was complacent. But for that to happen, you should know that what exactly is the definition of a disaster. And subsequently, the second thing, what was the violation done by them? Only then you will be getting compensation for it. So with respect to the legal system of India, it is not just the case that you are going to go and lodge a petition like that. You need to be specific. What exactly is your grievance? How exactly that grievance has hurt you? And in order for that particular hurt to be compensated, what do you want? Do you want action against the official? For example, are you following the student protest in Jantar Mantar? Okay. So there are a batch of petitions which are there with respect to the High Court and Supreme Court. But the point, yes, it's not about just listening to it. Do you even know what exactly are the petitions? Well, that's the point. When you talk about the petitions, what exactly are the petitions talking about? Are they all talking about just police atrocities, or are there various aspects to it? Is it also about sexual harassment? Is it also about excessive use of force? Because they are the people who have actually committed this are people who have been on the line of duty, and when you are on the line of duty, you have some amount of you can say insulation from a lot of legal action. So that is why when you have insulation from the legal action and you still seek an action, what are you going to do? You need to first of all identify the law that is going to give you this particular thing. Okay, so that is why you basically quote what are the various sections of once upon a time which was CRPC and today it is BNSS. Okay, why? Because you want to understand, okay, this is something which was to be done as a standard operating procedure, but this is what was done, and you have to prove it. If it is proved that there was a you can say digression or there was a violation, then any punishment can follow. Okay, unless that is the case, there will be no action that is going to be severe. You might be expecting that there should be a severe or strong action against some officials. That is not going to happen. Okay, so that is why the knowledge of law is very, very important for us. Understood? So that is why the first section here defines disaster. Okay, it defines both of them. It defines disaster. At the same time, it also defines disaster management. Because unless both of these things are going to be defined, this law cannot be applied. And that is exactly how all the laws in India are made. When you are going to read about polity, you will be reading about citizenship. Okay, so citizenship in India is basically something which is controlled by law. All of us are not the constitutional citizens of India. Let me tell you that. The only constitutional citizens of India are those individuals who were born before 26th of January 1950. Because the Constitution of India has specific provisions only for those individuals. Anyone who is born after 26th of January 1950, that is the commencement date of the Constitution of India, their citizenship is to be regulated by an act of parliament, and that is what you know as Citizenship Act. Okay, so all of us are citizens of this country based upon that act. Okay, so see this minute detail, but how exactly are you going to understand this? So this is what is the difference between reading and understanding. Okay, just like when exactly did India attain independence? August 15, 1947. And when did India become a republic? 26 January 1950. Do you know between 15th of August 1947 and 26th of January 1950 what was the status of India? Anyone? Was India not a republic? So what exactly was that? And what is dominion? See, between 15th of August 1947 till 26th of January 1950, India was having a dominion status. India was a dominion of the British Commonwealth. Okay. So, in that particular regard, the head of state was actually the British Crown. On 26th of January 1950, when we become a republic, our head of state became the President of India. Okay. So, since 26th of January 1950, we have had continuous periodic elections to elect the head of state. So, that is why, because we have an elected head of state, we are called a republic. Okay. If this particular position was hereditary, in that particular case, we would not have been called a republic. Just like when you talk about the British. So, the United Kingdom is not a republic. It's not a republic. Why? Because the head of state is still the British Crown. And it's a hereditary position. They don't elect their head of state. So, that is why it's not a republic. We are a republic. Okay. This is also a minute difference, but this is something that you are not going to understand till you read it properly. Okay. So, that is why always remember that whenever you are going to read about any act, that is something which you need to read. Let us say you are talking about NHRC or you are talking about any other act. You should at least know what exactly are the constituents of that act. So, this first of all defines you among other definitions. These are the two most important definitions which are given here. Okay. Then apart from that, it also establishes certain institutions. What exactly does it establish? It establishes the National Disaster Management Authority. Okay. It establishes National Institute for Disaster Management. It establishes State Disaster Management Authority, District Disaster Management Authority. Okay. It establishes National Disaster Response Force. This is something that you know as NDRF. Okay. And amongst all, there are other bodies as well which are established. But these are the bodies which are prominently established by it. Apart from this, it also establishes National Disaster Relief Fund, and also at the level of state. This is also known as NDRF and National Disaster Mitigation Fund. Okay. A lot of institutions that are actually established by it. We'll be reading about each of them, don't worry. So, these are the various institutions that are established by it. There are financial mechanisms that it establishes, and apart from that, it also is going to tell you what exactly are the offences and penalties in case this particular act is violated. Okay. So, every single thing is here. This particular act has been amended in 2025. There has been an amendment in 2025. What exactly was the amendment? We'll be talking about it. Okay. So, now let us individually deal with the various you can say features of the National Disaster Management Authority. Disaster Management Act. Now, if you want to know the implementation, this was implemented from January 2006. Then it came into existence. Okay, before that it was not in their existence. Done. Sure. So now let us understand what are the features. Now this is the next important thing when you are going to read about any of the acts that are going to be there with respect to polity. Because when you start reading polity, the first section is about historical background. Okay, the historical you can say evolution that actually made us come to the Constitution of India. So that is why before that we had a lot of acts that were actually there with respect to the government which is going to run inside India, how exactly the various things are going to be running. Okay, so there is a very prominent thing, features of these acts. So features basically tell you features or provisions, what exactly this act contains. Okay, so this is the next important thing that you are going to read about. So this is how you break down any law, and you do not need to know everything, but yes, there are features that we should be knowing. Okay, so they are known as features or provisions. So the first feature or provision is that it has already defined clearly what exactly would be disaster, what exactly would be disaster management. Okay, now apart from that, what exactly is going to be the case here? So when we talk about the features or provisions, so the first thing is establishment of National Disaster Management Authority. That's the first thing it does. Now what exactly is the National Disaster Management Authority? It is going to be defined in terms of three things. One, what is its composition? Second, what are its functions? Third, what are its powers? Okay, so here we are going to talk about its composition. So when you talk about the composition of the National Disaster Management Authority, we see that it is the first you can say member would be Prime Minister of India. So whoever is going to be the Prime Minister of India, they are going to be the ex officio chairperson. So what do you mean by ex officio? By the virtue of occupying this position. So that is basically how you see the first one. So whoever is going to be the Prime Minister of India, they would be the head of the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority. Now then, the next one. At most 9 members to be nominated by the chairperson. So in this particular case, that would be the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister can nominate any 9 members at the most to this particular authority. Okay, that is what is the NDMA. Understood? Now when you talk about the tenure, so tenure as per the act, now there are two things, what is given in the act and what is there in the you can say what exactly is there in the reality. So in the act, the tenure is given to be determined by the government of India. Okay, and under the rules of this particular act, the tenure is basically 5 years. So the members will have a tenure of 5 years, not the Prime Minister. Till the time you are Prime Minister, you will be having this tenure. So again, another thing that you will be noticing with respect to the Constitution of India. Okay, When you talk about the Prime Minister of India, first of all, there are no qualifications apart from being the citizen of India and to be elected, to be legally elected to the lower house of the parliament or to the Parliament of India. Okay. Apart from that, there is no minimum age. You can become a Prime Minister of India even now if you have that. Okay. The next thing, there is no tenure that has been given to the Prime Minister of India by the Constitution of India. So the Constitution of India does not give you any tenure. So technically what is going to happen, that here also this particular 5 years is for the members. Okay, understood? So this is the composition. Now after this composition, what exactly are the functions of NDA? Nominated by the chairperson, so anyone can be nominated. Okay, they could be bureaucrats, they could be ministers, for that matter they could also be civil you can say people. Okay, but usually they come from ministries and bureaucracy only. Next thing, functions. Now this is the next important thing that we should be knowing, what exactly are the functions. So when you talk about the National Disaster Management Authority, the first function that has been given to it is planning for disaster preparedness and mitigation. So I have told you the meaning of mitigation. Okay, so that is the first thing, that they are going to initiate this particular process. Okay, second thing, approving plans. Made by ministries, departments, at the same time states, because when we talk about this particular National Disaster Management Act, it basically gives this responsibility to every single level of government, that you should have a plan. Okay, third thing it basically talks about is capacity building for disaster preparedness and mitigation. That's the next thing. Okay, then ensuring disaster management is integrated into developmental plans. Of various ministries and departments. Okay, and finally, because you are wanting every single ministry, department, everyone to make a plan, you want to ensure that they are integrating this particular thing in their developmental agenda. So you also have to arrange funding for them. Okay, so that is why allocating funds for disaster management and mitigation. Okay, so these are the broad functions of the National Disaster Management Authority. Now understand one thing, that when you talk about a disaster in India, it is never going to be overseen by the NDMA. NDMA is not the overseeing authority of a disaster. Okay, the disasters are to be administratively handled by various of the ministries, whatever disaster it is. For example, when you talk about the disaster related to thunderstorm, floods, droughts, okay, So these are basically climatological disasters, and the primarily you can say the primary victim of these disasters would be agriculture. So that is why they are the ones which are handled by the Ministry of Agriculture. Disasters, thunderstorms, droughts, thunderstorms, cold waves. Okay, so these are basically the ones which are handled by the Ministry of Agriculture. When you talk about earthquakes, tsunamis, now they are handled by Ministry of Home Affairs. So that is why you have to understand that this does not see it. There are various departments and ministries that lead various disasters. When you talk about any of the disasters which are related to the industry, so depending upon the type of industry, it will either be Ministry of Heavy Industries or for that matter MSMEs, depending upon the disaster. When it is an atomic energy disaster, that will be DAE directly, Department of Atomic Energy. So that is why this is something which will keep on changing. Okay, leadership is with any one of them. Just like when you talk about COVID-19. So for the purpose of COVID-19, the leadership was with Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Okay, so that is how it is going to change. Now, so this is basically more of a planning and policy making kind of body. Okay, now the next body which comes with NDMA, okay, that is something which is known as the National Executive Committee. This is NEC. So when you talk about the National Executive Committee, so the National Executive Committee is basically the one that is responsible for providing assistance to NDMA. Okay, so for any kind of assistance, the NDMA is going to look for the National Executive Committee. The next thing, they are basically the ones who are required to formulate the national level disaster management plan. Okay, so they are the ones who are going to make this particular plan. Approval is with NDMA. Okay, third thing that they basically are going to do is implement disaster mitigation plans. At various ministry or department plans. So they are basically going to ensure the compliance. Okay, they are also going to be recommending funding from NDRF for states assistance. So whenever the states are going to, whatever states are going to be hit by a disaster, if they need financial assistance, they basically ask the center to release funds from the National Disaster Response Fund. Now this particular committee is going to recommend if they are going to have this particular fund, and what is the quantum of fund. You might be seeking, let us say 1000 crores, but they are going to evaluate your proposal and then they are going to give, let us say 600 crores. So that is what is going to happen, because whatever you demand cannot be given to you. So that is what they do. Okay, now so you understand this is a pretty important aspect of your NDMA, because NDMA is going to work on their particular you can say overall recommendation, and during the time of a disaster they are the ones who are going to implement things. Okay, so this is headed by Secretary to the General to the Government of India. For the Department under which the disaster responsibility falls. So whichever department or ministry is going to be leading a particular disaster management, their secretary is going to head the National Executive Council. Now this is a very fine line where most of the people, in fact even in journalistic articles, you might be finding that they basically say that the National Executive Committee is headed by the Secretary to the Government of India from the Home Department. So that basically means the Home Secretary of India. Okay, that person is the one who leads this particular. No, that is not the case. It is going to be changing. It's never fixed. If it's a drought, it will be the Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture that is going to lead the NEC. During the COVID-19 times, it was basically the Secretary of you can say the Ministry of Family and Health, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare that actually led this. Okay, so this keeps on changing. Now comes the next part. Now we have another body, National Crisis Management Committee, NCMC. Okay, so National Crisis Management Committee is also one such body which has been there before the enactment of the Disaster Management Act. So before the Disaster Management Act came into picture, this body was responsible for managing the disaster in the country. Now with the amendment of 2025, this was made a part of Disaster Management Act. Okay, so now this is a statutory body. Established under DM Act or Disaster Management Act 2005. Okay, so this particular body became a statutory body with amendment of 2025. Do you understand what exactly is an amendment? Not just constitution. Amend basically means to correct or to change. Amend as a verb is to correct or to change. You can amend, you can make amends. Let us say you basically watch any of the good English movies which have very good English usage. So in that you are going to see that someone who basically has done something wrong in the past, they basically say that I want to make amends. So amend actually means change, or for that matter correction. You can. Article 370 was repealed from the Constitution of India. Article 35A was taken out of the Constitution of India. So you can completely change. See, when you talk about amend with respect to the Constitution of India, that is done via Article 368. So in that particular, you can say meaning of amendment is also given, that it is either modification of the text, replacement of the text, or repeal of the text. You can take something completely down, you can completely modify something, or you can change the wordings. All of the three are going to be called as amendment. Okay, and that is specifically with respect to the Constitution of India. These are different. These are laws. Laws and constitution are two different things. Laws are made by the parliament. Constitution was made by the Constituent Assembly. For changing a law, you will not require the majority that is required for changing the Constitution of India on most of the cases. Okay, just like have you known this, that the Nari Shakti Vandan bill, that amendment which was supposed to come in, that was something which failed in the Constitution, 131st Constitutional Amendment Bill. Why did it fail? Yeah, there was no, you can say, special majority which was needed. So why special majority? Because you are changing the Constitution of India. So when you talk about the Constitution of India, for the purpose of amending the Constitution, it is a very strict policy that you cannot be doing it as you wish. You will need to convince a certain minimum number of member of parliaments from both the houses separately in order to get the Constitution amended. That is why, because they did not have the numbers, this particular amendment failed. Okay, but let us say you want to change a law. This is not going to require special majority. This is only going to require a simple majority, and in this particular simple majority also only the members present and voting, more than 50% of that. So let us say even if there are 100 members who are there, so 51 members if they are actually going to be doing you can say favoring this, it can be changed. Okay, so understand this very properly, what exactly is that. So amend is basically to change. So this was amended in 2025 to make this a constitution, a statutory body. Now there are two types of bodies that you might be talking about, three types rather: constitutional bodies, statutory bodies, and executive bodies, or maybe neither constitutional nor you can say statutory. So what is the difference? The bodies which are mentioned in the Constitution of India with respect to their you can say establishment, they are basically the ones which are known as constitutional bodies. So because they are given in the Constitution of India, it cannot happen that you will be having those things vacated. They will always be existing and functioning. For example, let us say Election Commission of India. It is mentioned into the Constitution of India. So because it is mentioned into the Constitution of India, as soon as a vacancy arises, you will have to fill that vacancy, because that agency has to work. Okay, it cannot happen that okay, all the three, one has gone, okay, two more are remaining, the second has gone, the third one is also gone, and it is still there. No, you have to appoint the members there as soon as you can. Okay, same is the case with UPSC. UPSC is also a constitutional body. Now there are second types of body which are known as statutory body. So statutory, this word comes from the word that is known as statute, and statute means law, ordinary law. So statutory body would be a body that is going to be established by any law of the country, not the constitution. So when you talk about National Human Rights Commission, it's a statutory body. Okay, you talk about National Green Tribunal. Do you know NGT? National Green Tribunal, it's a statutory body or constitutional body? It's a statutory body. It's a statutory body. The act came in 2009. When you talk about Supreme Court of India, Supreme Court of India is a constitutional body. Okay, it's a proper arm. It's not a body. It's an arm, judiciary. Okay, but that is something which is mentioned in the Constitution of India. So do you understand the difference? Now the third type of body is the one which is neither constitutional nor statutory. So these are the bodies which are established by the government on its own. Okay, why? Because the government feels there is a need for this organization. So that is why they are basically the ones which are established. But they will be established using a government resolution. That means a government order will be you can say issued, and based upon that this particular body is going to be established. Okay. For example, when you talk about Niti Aayog, Niti Aayog is one such body. Okay. Do you know CBI? What is CBI? What do you think is the kind of what is the nature of this body? Statutory body? No. So Delhi Police Act, it does not actually come from Delhi Police Act. It was not established by Delhi Police Act. It derives its power from that. It was not established under Delhi Police Act. DSPE, that is Delhi's Special Police Establishment, from which it derives its powers or functions, not even powers, its functions. It is not its governing act. It was not established by it. It is neither constitutional nor statutory. It's an executive body. Okay. So this is basically how the differences are. Just like Planning Commission. Planning Commission was one such body which was an executive body. Till 2014, that was the central planning structure of India. It used to give us the 5-year plans we just talked about. Okay. But once the government changed, they you can say they disbanded the Planning Commission, and instead of that came Niti Aayog. Now in Niti Aayog's constitution, that basically means when the Niti Aayog was forming, in that particular you can say letter only it has been written, whatever were the functions that were done by Planning Commission will now be inherited by the Niti Aayog, and that is why we call Niti Aayog as the successor to the Planning Commission. Okay, understood this? So now are you clear with statutory, constitutional and executive bodies? Is this okay? Okay. Now talking about this particular body, National Crisis Management Committee. Now this body is headed by the Cabinet Secretary of India. So this is the highest position that an IAS officer is going to have with respect to the civil services hierarchy. This is the highest position that you could be having. Okay, headed by the Cabinet Secretary. Now this particular body is the main responding body. Response to disasters and coordinates the efforts. This is their objective. So see, there are two parallel things that go on. National Executive Committee is also there. National Crisis Management Committee is also there. So even now we are trying to rationalize these two committees together. Because what is happening, the same disaster is going to be handled by them, NEC. They also have powers. These also have the same powers. They are responsible for responding to disasters as well as coordinating the effort of the various ministries involved. So that is why our disaster management structure, at least at the top, is still undergoing a transition. Okay, we have two separate bodies which tell this. Now, where have you actually listened to this particular NCMC? Okay, if you have followed COVID-19, so during COVID-19, what happened was that with respect to COVID-19, every single time when you had to extend the lockdown, okay, every single time the lockdown was to be extended, that was something which was the recommendation was given by NCMC, National Crisis Management Committee. Okay, so during the COVID-19 lockdown time, they were the ones who were issuing the orders for lockdown, which areas are to be locked down, what exactly are going to be the contamination or containment zones, and then subsequently what would be the time during which public amenities would be available. So they were the ones who were handling it, but it was led by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So you have read about this during that particular time. Understood? So that is National Crisis Management Committee. So this is an example you can directly quote. Now COVID-19 was a pandemic that was and this is basically the first time during COVID-19, this was the first instance for invoking the Disaster Management Act. The DM Act 2005 has never been invoked but for this one. And COVID-19 was also the time when another act was invoked. Epidemics Prevention Act 1897. So two of these acts were invoked simultaneously to deal with COVID-19. Okay, and this was led by the National Crisis Management Committee, NCMC. So when you talk about the allocation of liquid medical oxygen, initially it was handled by them. But when there were discrepancies with respect to the supply of oxygen to various hospitals, that caused a lot of loss of life, especially during the second phase, the Delta phase. So at that particular moment of time, the Supreme Court took that responsibility upon itself, that it will now be Supreme Court monitored. And in that manner, this particular function was taken away from them. So now do you understand this structure? Okay, so take a 5 minutes break, then we'll start with the state part. Okay, state and district. So whatever has come at the level of the center will also come at the level of the state. Okay, so that is also going to be replicated at the level of district. But yes, there will be differences that will be there. Okay, that is something that we are going to see in the coming class. Because when you talk about right to health, that's a fundamental right. So when it's a fundamental right, it's above the body. Okay, right to health is with everyone, and in that particular moment of time when the liquid medical oxygen was not properly, you can say disbursed, not properly secured. So at that particular moment of time, it was the people who actually lost their lives. So it was then understood that there is some discrepancy that is happening which is not being handled by them. So what you have asked is what was also asked by a lot of people, that judiciary does not have any power to do this. But then they explained it with respect of the right to health, that fundamental right is above your jurisdiction. So that is how they basically came in and stepped for that particular time. So that particular you can say action is something that is known as judicial activism, when the judiciary takes over the work of executive or the legislature. So in this case it was the executive whose work was taken up. Understood? Okay. Take a 5 minutes break and then we'll start again. Till then, if you have any other interesting doubts, you can ask me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where exactly is it happening? It's in Bangalore. Okay. Yeah. Okay. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Hmm. Umar Khalid is basically he was a former JNU scholar, okay, who has been jailed under UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, since the Northeast Delhi riots of 2020. So what basically happened was that at that particular moment of time there was another massive protest that is known as the protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act. So at that particular moment of time he was spearheading this protest from JNU in some other places as well. So he was actually also framed with respect to instigating the Northeast Delhi riots as one of the culprits. And since then he has been under incarceration with no trials and no bails. Till date, no trial, no bail, every single bail plea has been rejected. So the point is that even the courts have been asking the police what exactly are the charges. They are not able to produce any charges. But at the same time, the Supreme Court is denying the bail on the instance that this particular instigation of the people is about law and order. The public order gets disturbed and it caused a lot of damage at that particular moment of time. So the technicality that there is a certain limitation on the time that you can be keeping any particular person without the trial goes away. So that is why I mean that part is also there. There are a lot of different facets of this particular protest. It is not just about NEET. NEET is something for which they are already protesting there, demanding the resignation of the education minister, bringing in more accountability. It also has a facet with respect to employment. Okay, yesterday some TET paper also leaked out. So if one protest is already happening and another leak has happened, who is responsible? So fixing accountability is one of the aspects. Then when you talk about the larger aspects, it is also about how you can say we are making the government accountable for E20. That protest is also joined with this. Okay, the activists who are here, they are also joined with this, who are in the prison or who are outside. When you talk about Ladakh, they basically are seeking statehood. Jammu Kashmir, they are seeking statehood. So a lot of different aspects are there with respect to these protests. Okay. Now, why exactly are they there? I am not sure. And agreed. So how would the children know? That's the point. The children will never know this. And that is the funny thing about democracy. In democracy, only few people know what exactly is going on. Most of the people are just there in that is the herd mentality we have. With respect to the people in Delhi, at least what is shown to you is something that people are oriented towards NEET. But if you expect the same thing here at the same level of organization, that is never going to happen. It even did not happen during 1857 rebellion. To talk about Quit India movement, it did not happen then. How can you expect it now? So yes, there will be degradation and degeneration of the ideas. But the point is that whatever now is the grievance, they want to bring it to the front. That's the point. So you cannot say it is completely right, but at the same time it cannot be said to be completely wrong. Because accountability, when you talk about accountability of the government, this is also a part of accountability. See, the first thing is that in his tenure, there have been multiple central level paper leaks. Because of this, a lot of money has been wasted and a lot of opportunities have also been lost. So the first thing is that if he is erring again and again, there should be a moral responsibility. That's the first thing. Okay. And the point is that unless there is a political will, nothing in India is going to reform. So that political will is something which needs to be nudged some of the times. That is what they are trying to do. Even if you are a great civil servant, but whatever ministry you are serving, they are not happy with your ideas. Will you be able to implement it? Answer is no. So that is why you need some political, you can say, willingness as well, no? So that is what they are trying to do. They are just a pressure group as of now. That they want that, okay, the government should fix the accountability on a particular department and specifically on a particular minister. That is what they are saying. So yes, one part of the story is that, yes, okay, I mean, what is going to change? The point is accountability. Because this is also going to be serving as an example for the government, that the people are not sleeping or they are not blind. They will be questioning you because they are the ones who have given you that power to lead the country. So that's the point. There are many interpretations to it. Just like the word Swaraj. Swaraj meant something else for moderates. It meant something else for the extremists. Everyone had a different definition for Swaraj. Okay, so it's like that. So see, democracy is very, you can say, funny that ways. Just like we say English is a very funny language, it can accommodate everything. Democracy also can accommodate everything. That is why, I mean, there is a change in the ideas. Everyone everywhere will be having something or the other with them. It's not the case. So taking a stance, what is right and what is wrong, it's a very difficult thing. Now kids are basically under peer pressure. They are under peer pressure. Yeah, they don't even know what is happening. And they're not supposed to be there, first of all. Yeah. See, even if your parents are there, you should be with your parents. I mean, you cannot be roaming around. That's not a picnic spot. That's a protest. Okay, that way. So, yes, protests will always have a lot of different tangents. You cannot say that the protest will always have one objective. That is why it is protest. Tomorrow you might be thinking about that, okay, we should be saving the forests. But the people who are working in forest will be opposing you. Right? Uttarakhand wants no more construction. But construction is important for infrastructure. At the same time, it also wants to preserve its forest because there are tribal communities that depend upon it. Okay, extensive amount of landslides that happen there. But it does not mean you will not be having people who are not going to oppose it. You would be shocked to know on one part of the world we basically talk about greenhouse gases emissions and decarbonizing our sectors. We should be using less of coal and everything. There is a coal coalition in the world that says we are a cleaner coal than what you are trying to do with respect to other things. We are cleaner than that. There is a significant lobby of that as well. So what can you say about it? That's the thing. Dimensions will be different. They will be multifarious. The overall objective that you are seeing is that, but locally they may change. That will be the case. Okay. This is something that you will understand when you are going to read history. Everyone had a separate grievance with everyone else. Not everyone knew British government. They knew their zamindar. So their grievance was with the zamindar. If the zamindar changed, that would be okay. They will not rebel. That is why the 1857 was not a pan-India revolution. It was concentrated on certain pockets. And you will be doing your modern India, you will be understanding this better. But what I am trying to tell you that local situations are going to have a different thing. Overall situations will be a different impact. Okay, anything else? Take your break, then let's start. one. See, the flavor of democracy is that you have a lot of things changing. And when you understand change is something that will keep on coming, you then try to process what exactly is the change, is it good or bad. That as a citizen is your responsibility to evaluate if the change coming is good or bad. Okay, chalo, done with this. Now let's talk about State Disaster Management Authority. So see, I'll tell you one trick to read polity as well. How many of you have read polity? You have read polity. You guys haven't. Okay. When you read polity, so when you read polity, always understand that when you're reading the chapter of executive or legislature, okay, read them parallelly with the state. Just like at the level of center, you have the president. At the level of state, you will be having governor. At the level of center, you basically have a vice president, but you don't have a similar, you can say, equivalent there. But at the center, you have prime minister. At the state, you have chief minister. The point is, they are the same individuals, same authorities, just their jurisdiction is different. You will find exactly same words written in both of them. Only difference would be the territory that they are holding that power. When you talk about President of India, so they are going to be talking about the entire territory. But when you talk about governor of a state, the jurisdiction is limited to the state. Same is the case with legislature. Okay. So when you talk about legislature, when you talk about parliament, it makes the law for the entire country. When you talk about state legislature, it makes the law for the state only. So read them parallelly. Once you finish the center, read the equivalent of the state. And you will see the same provisions, just the articles number change. The powers and everything exactly is the same. So that is how you reduce your time to read polity. Same thing happens here as well. Whatever I have just discussed with respect to the national level, now the only thing that is going to come down here is the change of the words. Everywhere where it is national, it will become state. So when you talk about State Development Disaster Management Authority, who headed the National Disaster Management Authority? Prime Minister. So who should head it here? See. So this would be headed by Chief Minister, ex officio. Whoever is the Chief Minister will be having this. Second, the only difference is basically with the number of members that you are going to nominate. In National Disaster Management Authority, 9 members were getting nominated. Here, 8 members. At most 8 members nominated by the chair. And another addition here would be chairperson of State Executive Committee. They are the 3 who actually has the composition. Okay, State Disaster Management Authority. Whatever the National Disaster Management Authority did for the nation, the same thing they are going to do for the state. So should we repeat it or should we let it go? Let it go? Good. See, now when you talk about State Executive Committee, now this particular committee will also have the same thing that was being done by the National Executive Committee. Okay, but this is going to be headed by Chief Secretary of the State. Here it is fixed. Four other secretary level officers. That's it. They will have the exact same function that was being done by both your NCMC and National Executive Authority. Both of them, the combined function would be here. Implementation of the plans, execution of the plans, response of disasters. This is something they are going to handle. Okay. Then after this comes the district level committee. Okay, but before that there is one very special you can say responsibility for the state executive committee, state plan. So this is something that is to be made by this particular committee, the state plan. Okay, so state plan is prepared by the state executive committee, and this is something which is going to include the following. It will include all the vulnerabilities. So whatever is the vulnerabilities of the state, of all regions for various disasters. This is the first thing that they are going to tell you. What are the disasters for which the state is prone to, and then which region of the state is prone to which type of disaster. Okay, so vulnerability of the entire state. Then at the same time, the next thing that they are going to include in this would be the roles and responsibilities of various ministries and governments, or various ministries and departments. That is what is going to be the state plan, and this particular plan is the one which is going to be approved by the NDMA for the state. So every single state has to have this particular plan. Okay, so DM Act mandates all the states to formulate this plan. And at the same time, it is to be reviewed annually. Okay, this is something which will be reviewed annually as well. Now we are going to come down to the district. Okay, shall we go ahead? So now comes District Disaster Management Authority. This is where the real action would be. Okay, so this is something which will be headed by district collector, or in some places it is known as district magistrate, DM. Okay, who exactly are going to be members? There are two specific members here. Okay, so that will be the superintendent of police and district chief medical officer. So whoever is the CMO. Okay, and the third, two district level officials. Appointed by the government. So they are going to be called as the District Disaster Management Authority. Okay, now they are basically the ones who are there to formulate district level plans. So they are the ones who are going to formulate district level plans. They are going to also ensure implementation of measures related to capacity building. And disaster mitigation. So this is going to be the first responder to any particular disaster. So they are the ones who are also responsible for ensuring enough adequate stock of food and relief material at various places in the district. Okay, that is how the district disaster management authority works. So whatever is the level of plan at the state, a similar plan for the district is going to be done by the district disaster management authority. So what exactly is going to happen once you are working at the level of the district? Okay, this is something which is also co-chaired. It is going to be co-chaired by chairperson of Zilla Parishad if it exists. If there is a Zilla Parishad, then the chairperson of the Zilla Parishad, then they are going to co-chair this particular thing with respect to the district collector or the district magistrate. Okay. So now imagine this, that at the level of district, when a plan is going to be prepared, it will be a comprehensive plan which is going to be for every single settlement of that district. When this is going to be integrated over the state, because a state is made out of these districts, so the disaster management plan of the state is going to be built upon this particular plan, and then based upon the disaster management plan of the states, we will then be having a national plan. So that is how it basically becomes a comprehensive disaster mitigation strategy. Okay, so this is basically what is required, and as the Disaster Management Act required mandatory having of state level disaster management plans, this is also mandated by the by the DM Act. Okay, so mandatory to be formulated. So this is basically one of the most important functions that you will be having as the collector of a district, or for that matter if you go into the police services, so as a superintendent of police. Okay, one of the most important aspects would be having this particular thing. So this is what you are preparing yourself for, and then subsequently all the others, you can say higher ups. Understood? Any confusion till here? Now let us talk about, now this is something we have done. Now let us talk about National Institute for Disaster Management. So National Institute for Disaster Management is a specialized agency established under the DM Act. Okay, so this is something which has been established under DM Act. Okay, and this is basically the body which actually works for the purpose of you can say capacity building at the level of the nation. So all the kinds of mock drills, all the kinds of disaster resilient infrastructure, and all the kinds of safety precautions that need to be taken, they are the ones which are reviewed. They are something which are going to be generated, and then at the same time first of all tested here. Then from here this is something which is going to come towards the various levels. So that is basically National Institute for Disaster Management. Okay, and why exactly is this particular institution important? Because at the DM Act, so DM Act also gives certain responsibilities to local level government. So when you talk about local government, you are basically talking about panchayat or municipality. Okay, so what exactly is there? You can say responsibility with respect to the DM Act: ensure all officers are trained for disaster management. Where exactly is this particular training coming from? NIDM. Okay, they are basically the ones who are going to be having this particular training done. And then the second thing, ensure provisioning of relief material. So these are the two very, very important responsibilities for the local government as well. Now, in order for the disaster, you can say disaster to be managed, one part of it is planning. So for planning, you have seen so many different types of bodies. Okay, but what after the disaster strikes? So once the disaster strikes, so after that, the first thing that you have to do is launch search and rescue. So for this search and rescue operation, this particular act also establishes the National Disaster Response Force, NDRF. Okay. Now NDRF is basically a force that has been drawn from various central armed police forces of the country, and they specialize in search and rescue operations with respect to disasters. Okay. So whenever there is any kind of disaster that strikes a particular place, an NDRF team or a battalion is you can say demarcated for taking up the job of search and rescue, and then at the same time rehabilitating the people or evacuating the people from danger zones. Okay. When the NDRF gets overwhelmed with capacity, then the defense forces of India are also pushed in. Okay. So that is why in some of the disasters during the rescue, you will find not just NDRF but also you can say the armed forces personnel, you will be finding Navy personnel, they basically come in. Okay. Do you know Nagarjun Sirisalam Sagar? Where is this? This is basically a very big reservoir. Okay. So last year there was a you can say an accident there, which was basically Sirisalam left bank canal that was being built up. So when this particular tunnel was being dug, at that particular moment of time, the water pressure from the dam was so high that the water completely collapsed the roof, a part of the roof or the ceiling when this tunnel was being dug, and about 41 you can say workers and engineers got trapped. So now basically in order to get them out, the first responders were the State Disaster Response Force. When they could not handle it, it was sent to NDRF. Okay. Now when the NDRF was not able to do this, then we called in the BRO, the Border Roads Organization, because they are specialized at tunneling and boring operations. When even they could not do it, then we called in the armed forces personnel. Okay, so the engineers from Army Corps of Engineers, then the engineers from Navy, they came down in order to stabilize that particular structure so that we could be taking out the debris and then getting these people out of that particular disaster. But the point is, none of this helped. Okay, every single one succumbed and they are still there in that tunnel. Okay, because of the immense amount of water pressure, nothing could be done. Nobody was able to stabilize that you can say the tunnel boring. So that is how you see that in many of the operations, when the NDRF is overwhelmed or understaffed, in that particular time, the armed forces can also be deployed. Understood? Okay. So that is NDRF. So these are all the things that I have already told you with respect to NDRF and everything. Yeah, one more thing that is there is basically the various you can say organizations or the funds that we are going to have. But before that, let us discuss NDRF. So NDRF is established under section 44 of the DM Act, and it basically has you can say created by upgrading or converting 8 battalions from the existing CAPF. Now this particular number has changed to 16. Initially when it was established, this had 8 battalions. Okay, and all of them came from the Central Armed Police Forces. So when you talk about the Central Armed Police Forces, they are limited in number. What are these? Assam Rifles, CISF, Central Industrial Security Force, CRPF, Central Reserve Police Force. You have then you have ITBP, Indo-Tibetan Border Police. You have Sashastra Seema Bal, SSB. You have Border Security Force, BSF, National Security Guard, NSG. So they are all the you can say CAPFs that are there in the country. So from them we basically have got the participation of BSF, ITBP, CISF and CRPF with respect to the NDRF. Okay. So now this particular thing has also been joined by Sashastra Seema Bal and Assam Rifles as well. Okay, they are the ones who are contributing their battalions here. So initially it started with 8, today we have 16 such battalions. Okay, and every such battalion has 1149 personnel who are organized in a 47-member team. So every single time a disaster is going to strike, one such team is deployed at a time. Okay. So depending upon the intensity of the disaster and the spread of the disaster, number of teams are going to be sent up from these. And these battalions actually have been, you can say, spread out across the country. They are not centralized in Delhi. They are spread out across the country and their zones have been demarcated. Who is going to handle which zone? Okay. Now they are, you can say, trained for both the kinds of disasters, natural as well as you can say human made. So okay, so when you talk about human made disasters, they are basically known as CBRN. CBRN. So that basically means chemical, biological, nuclear and radiological. These disasters, apart from the natural disasters, all of them can be handled by the NDRF. Apart from this, the states are also free to raise their own individual SDRF battalions. And if they are going to be raised up, they will be guided by the national level NDRF. At the same time, it has also been said that NDRF will be deployed every single time any state is going to request for assistance. Okay. So it does not mean that NDRF will only come in when there is a disaster. If the state feels that we need these particular thing for, let us say, rescue, when we talk about Sri Salem left bank canal, so at that particular moment of time it was not a disaster, but still upon the request of the state, the NDRF was sent. On the request of the state, the defense personnel were sent. Okay. So this is NDRF. Any doubts still here? So this is basically right now the NDRF and where they are located throughout the country. Okay. So 16 such battalions are there and they do not just serve in India, they have also served outside India. So NDMA's one primary objective is also to maintain coordination with other countries which need the assistance of India. So when you talk about Myanmar, when you talk about Nepal, when you talk about Turkey, so we basically have also sent up those particular NDRF battalions so that they could be helping in something that is known as HADR. Okay, so these operations are known as HADR. That means humanitarian aid and disaster relief. So our entire defense forces, you talk about Army, Navy, Air Force, NDRF, they all also execute HADR, you can say, missions with respect to international rivers or international bodies, water bodies. Okay. So when you talk about the Indian Ocean tsunami, so at that particular moment of time also, the navies of India, USA, Australia and Japan, they coordinated together to actually provide relief to the various affected people and the various affected coasts. That is what was the beginning of Quad. You know Quad, QUAD, that actually began as a HADR operation during the time of Indian tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami 2004. Okay. So these HADR missions are very common and they are a very important pillar of our diplomacy with all the countries. Okay, because India always has been one of the first responders to any such crisis. Let us see some of the international missions that they had done. So right after their formation, the first one that they participated was the Kosi floods. Now Kosi is a tributary of Ganga. It is known as the sorrow of Bihar. Why? Because this particular river has the notoriety that it continuously changes its course. It does not flow on a fixed channel. It changes its course. So when it is flowing on a particular channel, people start living on the banks of the river. But when the river is going to change its channel, what is going to happen? The people, wherever they are living, that is going to get flooded. So that is something which happened with Kosi. Okay. So this was one of the first instances where NDRF was used. Then internationally, we will be talking about Fukushima. In 2010, there was a chemical disaster that happened in Mayapuri in Delhi. So Mayapuri is actually a very big, you can call a kind of junkyard kind of place. Okay, they have a lot of junk of automobile that comes up. So a lot of denting, painting related jobs and all these things happen here. So let us say you have missed one of the spare parts of your vehicle. Your vehicle, let us say something has been missed or something got damaged in one of the crashes. So you are not finding it anywhere. This is the place where you'll find it, Mayapuri. Okay. Apart from that, when you talk about the Sivakasi, you can say explosions that happened. When you talk about the POSCO chemical leaks that happened in Chennai, they were all handled by them. Okay. Then in Fukushima, 2011, Japanese triple disaster. That is where we find NDRF going. In 2023, we had NDRF being pushed into services in Turkey. Turkey nowadays it calls itself Turkey, but it's Turkey. What we know is okay. Then we have Syria. Then we have Myanmar. 2025 we had Myanmar where we went in. 2015 Nepal earthquake, NDRF went in, Indian Air Force went in. 2023 again Nepal earthquake, Indian Air Force went in. Okay. So in the region of Mandalay in Myanmar, NDRF went in apart from Air Force to set up a hospital. Okay. So this is basically the way that NDRF has been doing these operations. Okay. Then state disaster response force are basically on the discretion of the state. They may or may not have it. But this is something which will be guided properly by the central forces. So the central government is basically the one which assists and trains these officers. Okay. So they basically become the first responders to any such crisis. So that is why in order to incentivize the states to keep on building their own local battalions, it is allowed for the state governments to use 10% of their funds that are there in the state disaster response fund for the purpose of the expenditure related to SDRF. Okay. Now, when we talk about the funding, there are three funds, or let us say what kind of funds actually are there. So one fund is basically known as Disaster Relief Fund. And the second fund that is there is basically known as Disaster Mitigation Fund. So when you talk about Disaster Relief Fund, now this is something which will be used for providing relief. After a disaster strikes. When you talk about Disaster Mitigation Fund, now this particular fund is going to be used for disaster prevention and preparedness. And recovery. So there are two different funds, they are not the same. Okay. So this particular fund, when you talk about Disaster Relief Fund, this cannot be used for rehabilitation or recovery, or reconstruction. This cannot be used for that. It is only there to provide immediate relief. This is the place where you have to come for the purpose of recovery and for the prevention of disaster. Whatever kind of structure you want to have, that is to go from here. Okay. So when you talk about Disaster Relief Fund, you basically have two such funds. Okay. You will have one at the level of nation and then one at the level of state, that go with the same name, National Disaster Relief Fund, State Disaster Relief Fund. Okay. And at the level of the mitigation funds also, you will be having National Disaster Mitigation Fund and State Disaster Mitigation Fund. In both of them you have to allocate money. Okay. So you have to allocate money from your budget, that's the first part. Second, if someone wants to donate, that money has to be given directly to them. Let us say you want to donate some amount of money for the Disaster Relief Fund of the state. So that amount of money will straight away go to this account. It will not be taken through the consolidated fund. It will straight away be taken from this account. And they have to be given the money from the budgets. Okay. So every year from the budget, there has to be a budgetary allocation for this. So that is how you have this pool of money reserved. Why? So that in the future, wherever it is needed, you can immediately mobilize it. So now what exactly is the mandate? So the first thing is disaster. So when the disaster strikes, so the state has to use the funds of SDRF. That is the first thing, that you have to use the funds of SDRF. You cannot directly seek the central help. This is the first thing. Next, after this, you will request the center for assistance. This particular request for the center of assistance is actually sent to the National Executive Committee. The National Executive Committee is going to evaluate the request. Now this National Executive Committee is then going to recommend the quantum of fund to be released. And then subsequently this particular recommendation is given to the NDMA, and once NDMA approves, then the fund is dispersed. That is how this cycle goes on. Okay. This is how the you can say the relief mechanism works. So every single time when you hear any particular you can say state government talking that we are in the talks with center for getting certain funds. So first of all, that has to be routed using a request, and this request has to have a proposal of the estimated damage that you have. Okay. Now with respect to this, what happens is that once this request is received by the NEC, that is NDMA, it is forwarded to NEC. So the National Executive Committee now is going to have its own team survey that particular site, and then it is going to evaluate what of the headings that have been given in the request, what of them are legitimate for the purpose of relief, because NDRF is to be used for relief, not reconstruction. So many a times what happens is that the state governments, they also add the cost of reconstruction into this. That is why they would seek 1000 crores, 2000 crores and so many thousands of crores. So this is what they evaluate, what is required for relief, and based upon their report, they are going to recommend what amount of money is to be given for the purpose of relief. That is approved by NDMA, then it is sent to the state, and then again it goes, this particular fund again goes to the SDRF. From there, this is something which will go on. Okay, is this understood? Now this is something which usually is not told by everyone. Okay, now when you talk about the disaster relief fund, this will always be under the administration of the executive committee. Of National Executive Committee or State Executive Committee, whatever is the case. If it is the State Disaster Response Force, it will be in the possession of State Executive Committee. If it is the National Disaster Relief Fund, it is basically with the National Executive Committee. Now when you talk about the Disaster Mitigation Fund, this is under the administration of NDMA or SDMA. That is basically how it is. So this is the institutional mechanism that we have in the country for the purpose of dealing with this particular concept of disasters. Apart from that, there is also civil defense, but civil defense is basically volunteering services. These are the ones which are mandated under DM Act. So this is something that you should be knowing. Okay, regarding civil defense, I will tell you next time. But after this theoretical part comes all your you can say guidelines on various disaster management. So next time we go with the disasters. Now disaster management for various disasters remain very same, and they are not very huge. There are only 3 steps: pre-disaster, during disaster, after disaster. So there are certain steps that we have to see, and that's it. So that's not a big deal, but these things are actually the ones which need some time for you to coalesce things. Okay. So is this understood? Any doubts? So we are done for the day, and in the next class we'll begin with the technical analysis of the various disasters. Okay. Okay. See you later. Bye bye. Thank you.